Rosie, and I'm the manager of Artisan Craftsman Supply Louisville.
And I'm Mike, I'm the outside sales coordinator.
Today we're going to be learning about mold making materials.
There's a lot to learn, so let's dive in.
Mold making is a very complex issue. It is a mixture of chemistry and art making, and you need to really consider the object that you're molding and the final outcome that you're looking for in order to get from point A to point B successfully. And there are a lot of different ways to do that depending on what the answer to those first two questions are.
Exactly, and by no means is this video going to be a all-encompassing tutorial on how to go about making molds. What we're really trying to do is give you guys an understanding of the conceptual aspect of mold making, as well as all the working properties of the things that we sell here at Artisan Craftsman. There's going to be many different ways that you can make a mold. We're just going to kind of focus on those few. So without further ado, let's get into mold making talking. Okay, so before we dive into the different varieties of molds that can be made with the materials that we sell here at Artisan Craftsman, we have to define just a few terms just so that we're all on the same page. So first, Rosie, what's the difference between a rigid mold and a flexible mold?
Well, a flexible mold is going to be most of the materials that we sell here at Artisan Craftsman Supply. All of our rubbers and our latexes and everything are going to be flexible. And when it comes to undercuts, a little bit of flexibility will allow you to demold your objects much easier than a rigid mold. Rigid molds are going to be a lot less forgiving when it comes to pulling other rigid materials out of those. They do have their place, and we'll get into that later. But essentially, most of what we're going to be concentrating on are going to be flexible mold materials.
And the reason why we're concentrating on flexible mold materials is because of a bane of mold makers, which is called an undercut. So an undercut is a form or a detail that will not allow you to make a single part mold. So I know that sounds complicated. Let me show you a few visual aids as to why you need to kind of watch out for undercuts. So for instance, we have this light bulb, and if I were to pour a single block of rubber around this light bulb, there'd be no way I'd be able to pull it out afterwards. I would have to cut it out, rip it out, who knows how I'd get it out. So that is the undercut that is preventing me from being able to pull that out of that smaller little hole area. And also these form details on the screw end of the light bulb. So what I had to do was create a two-part mold so that you'd be able to easily demold it. But we're going to get that to there in just a second because we have one more hot topic to talk about. Rosie?
And that's going to be sealing your surfaces. Now this is a really important step, especially if your original is a porous material like raw wood or something along those lines. So even if you cannot see them, essentially all of the little pores in your porous material, if you are pouring a liquid material onto that, they will find their way into those pores and they will lock. Even if you're properly mold released, if that surface is not sealed, essentially it is a microscopic version of this problem. And it will flow into your pore and it will lock in there and you'll never be able to get your mold off of your original piece. And you're dead in the water before you even begin.
And that's also true not only of the pattern or the object that you're trying to mold, it's also true of if you're using whatever the materials you make boxes out of or wood boards that you put it onto. Everything must be sealed and mold released. It's really important.
Also, the surface of your material dictates the surface of your cast. So if you are looking for a really glossy, shiny surface on the material at the very end, then you need to start with that. So your sealing surface can definitely help dictate what that's going to look like. So if you, for instance, if you're wanting to cast a clear material and you want it to be able to see all the way through it, you need to use a glossy sealing agent, and that will help you to achieve your clarity. And if you want it to be kind of a translucent material, you can go with a matte surface.
So let's get into the different kinds of molds and really the basic, simple kind of molds that one would want to make with the materials that we sell here at Artisan Craftsman. So the first and by far the easiest that we're going to talk about is a one-part molds. Rosie?
Well, a one-part mold is essentially best achieved when your flat surface, or usually in most cases going to be the bottom, it represents the largest area, or at least close to the largest area of your overall form, like this. And essentially all you have to do is take your object, after it's sealed of course, stick it down to a base, build walls around it. In this case, we used a paper cup. We cut the bottom out of it, and we put it over that and glued the edges down. You mold release the entire piece, you mix your rubber, and you pour it on top. And once it's cured, you flip it over, take the walls away, and you can pour into this as many times as your mold will allow you to.
Perfect. So let's say, for instance, going back to the light bulb, we're not allowed to do that because of the general shape of the form has some undercuts in there. So what we need to do then is create a two-part mold. And the best way, or one of the easier ways, is called a clay investment technique. Now, with the clay investment technique, the goal is to create essentially half of the piece so that, or multiple halves, depending upon what the form is, so that I can have an easy demold. So for this particular example, I took oil-based clay and I pushed it all around this form here until I got to about the halfway mark. I ended up creating a pour spout because I need a means to be able to pour the material in after the mold has been created. And I also created some key registration. I just used a Stettler pencil to do that. And the keys are really, really important because ultimately I want my two halves to lock together and fit together right every time so that I get a really nice cast every time I pour it. So once I have the clay packed around my form, keys registered, pour spout made, I built a box. And that box I made out of plexiglass, hot glued it together. Then I mold released the whole form, mixed, and then I poured. I let that cure overnight. Once that is fully cured, I disassemble my box, carefully take everything, the clay and the rubber, and you want to leave the rubber that you just poured on your form still on your form, okay? You don't want to demold it at this time. But what you do want to do is take the clay off that you originally invested your first half in. Once you expose just the rubber, you should have your positive key holes here, and you're going to want to leave your pour spout out of clay intact, okay? So you're going to have to sculpt that a little bit. Then you build your box right back around it, mold release, and this is really important because whatever similar rubbers are going to want to stick to themselves, no matter what rubber it is, so you need to have a mold release on this one, even if it's a rubber that touts that it has self-releasing properties. So then, once it's mold released, I go ahead and I pour my material over the top, let that cure overnight, open up the box, and I should be able to easily separate out the molds, and it fits together thusly. And that's a real simplified kind of, walk through the park as far as two-part mold making. It doesn't always have to be 2 parts. It could be 3 parts. It could be 4 parts. The problem is when you get into more part molds, it becomes more and more complicated to make those breaks, which is why we're going to talk about the next style of molds, which is going to be probably the most popular, and it's also the most economic.
All right, so this is our example of a brush-up mold. And essentially, the reason that we decided to do this is for 2 reasons. Number one, we have a really major undercut underneath this thumb. And rather than make 2 parts of a block, which you could do on this,
easily do, yes.
But that's the other benefit of using this method, is that uses a lot of rubber. And it can get really expensive really fast. So instead of using 2 or maybe even 3 kits to make a block mold of this, I didn't even use a single one to brush up on this material. So essentially, you just glue it down in the same way that you would do a 1-part mold, and you literally brush it on. The first layer you want to go really thin. You want to stipple it on, meaning that the brushes, the bristles need to be pointed directly at it, and you just want to create a really thin layer of this material getting into all the little details. After that, you can start applying it a lot thicker, and especially in the undercut areas here and in between the fingers here, just to flesh it out, we actually added some cheesecloth that we embedded into the uncured silicone and kind of pasted it on there and painted it all around just so that we can bulk out that area without using the expensive material. So that is your initial, what's called a brush-up mold or a glove mold, because essentially all we had to do was cut it up that one side and you can peel it off like a glove.
Yes.
The problem with this, though, is it's very floppy. So if I tried to pour it in just like this, it would get distorted really easily. So this is why pretty much anytime you're going to make a brush-up mold, you need to make a mother mold to cradle it. And that's what this is. This is 1 part of a 2-part mother mold. And essentially all we did was build up some clay around this after this was all cured. You can use talc as a mold release for the silicone, and actually Vaseline as a mold release for the two parts of your plaster, and or in between your plaster and your clay. And we just slathered plaster all on top of this. And once that was cured, we pulled off all the clay, mold released again on the other side, and slathered some more plaster. And there you have your two-part mother mold and your brush-up mold inside.
So by no means is this the comprehensive kind of mold making tutorial, but it's just a way to kind of get started as far as how to go about making these molds and how to talk to customers about it. In the next segment, we're going to actually go in depth and talk about each one of the different mold making materials and their kind of properties, their pros and their cons, and kind of where they find themselves in the mold making realm as far as what kind of molds you can make out of them. So stay tuned for that. Should be a blast.
Thank you.